Hey folks, welcome to your weekly video. This is week one. This is Intro to LGBTQ Studies. You'll get a video every week, just giving you a breakdown, a shakedown of what we're going to be doing this week. So this week, I'm just going to go over sort of the syllabus, our course reader, which is an OER zero cost textbook, and just look at how our course is laid out and give you sort of a preview of some of our assignments. I'm Dr. C. I love teaching this class. I don't get often enough chance to teach this class. It comes up maybe once a year, once every other year. So I'm so glad to be here. So let's start with when you're on the Canvas homepage, right? You'll see that there's a modular or a weekly view. So under Getting Started, you'll see the syllabus and you'll see our course text. So when you click on our course text, you'll see, okay, we have a great free course text here. This is an OER, that means an open educational resource, or a zero cost textbook. This is a new movement in education to sort of make materials and resources free within college. It's a great movement. I hope it transforms education for the better. And OER essentially is these textbooks, these course resources. They can also be assignments. You can have an OER made assignments. And I've worked on some committees that have made some of these OERs. And they're made in the spirit of basically giving, making knowledge, information freely available. And they're also open copyright so that you can edit them, you can remix them, you can change them, and you can't be sued. Does that make sense? So they have no copyright. So they're made in sort of with the best intention of humanity to give knowledge. There's no paywall. There's no firewall. Does that make sense? They're all freely available rather than, oh, you got to pay for this code or you got to pay for the latest edition. And with the cost of textbooks going up and up, you see why me and so many instructors at South are turning to OER. Okay, so introduction, right? You can click on contents and get sort of a overview of the whole book. Think of this, we're going to go real simply. I just structured this course very simply. We're going to go chapter 1 through chapter 11, right? So we're just going to go through this textbook. I've looked at a bunch. I think this is the best free OER resource out there for Intro to LGBTQ Studies. So we're starting with an introduction. So you'll read that for this week. And then take a look at part 1, Theoretical Foundations, right? That's chapter 1. So you're going to get a lot of theory, like queer theory. And one of our discussion questions is, okay, you might have heard this word queer thrown around. And you're like, this is a really sort of hard to define word, right? So one of our discussion questions asks you to, well, ask a friend, ask a coworker, ask a family member, how do people define this word? And I hear people define it differently. Personally, I see this as more of a political definition or a political identity within being LGBTQ. But I don't think there's a right answer here. I think a lot of different people define this word differently. So I want us to just have this sort of robust, sort of fun conversation about, well, what do you think of when you think of this word queer? So, I've asked you to bring in an outside resource. This can be anything, social media, the LA Times, the Seattle Times, the Christian Science Monitor, the Hindi Times. Find a newspaper, find a source that you want to help you define this term. There's also a video that defines this term in chapter 1, right? But I also want you to bring in an outside resource. So I went to Google Scholar, right? And Google Scholar, I really want you to get in the practice of using Google Scholar. What I like about Google Scholar is it filters, obviously, Google for more professional sources, right? So these are more peer-reviewed, reliable, fact-checked, credible sources. And if you haven't used Google Scholar much, you can set it by date, right? You can look at things since 2020, since 2023. So I've set it since 2020, right? I want like more maybe current definitions, but I could go back in time, folks. I could go back to 1950, 1970, 1980, right? This word queer has changed a lot, right? And if you notice, you'll see to the right, there's PDF, PDF, PDF. Generally, when there is no PDF, you'll see to the right here, these articles generally aren't available. You'll get an abstract, but you can't get the whole article. It's usually when you see PDF that you can access the whole thing. So as you can see, you can get about half of these articles on Google Scholar, right? So that's just a way to like think about and scroll through. So I found some really interesting definitions on here as of queer as disrupting normative or normal or normalizing behavior. I think that's a really interesting definition, and I think that's kind of how I think of queer. Right? It's sort of as I was taught. It's disrupting the heterosexist matrix, right? That's a lot. That's a lot of big jargon words. Sorry. So I just I could have started with a newspaper or social media, but I tend to look at Google Scholar for the reliability of information. So I like this idea of defining queer as an identity, as an expression, as a political project, right? I think that's interesting. Or as subversiveness, right? Trying to subvert sort of what is supposed to be serious or normal or right the status quo, whatever that is, right? This author is describing it as nonconformity, as disruption, anti-assimilationist, right? So not being assimilated or right feeding into the status quo, right? Whatever is considered you're supposed to do, right? You should do this, right? So it's sort of like resisting shoulds, right? So I think I like that definition of queer, and that's often how I think of it. So I might put that in my discussion question, and here's my source, right? This is Eli Keene writing in this article in this journal called Multicultural Perspectives, right? I know that from up here, right? And I've got my author. This is University of Missouri. So I know that this person's kind of reliable, right? They have a university background and some experience. So that's one of our discussion questions this week. Okay, so again, you're doing the introduction, chapter 1 this week. Next week is chapter 2, right? Week 3 is chapter 3. Does that make sense? So we'll just go through these weeks. So some other things you might notice, right, are the course text lives under getting started. The syllabus lives under getting started. And if you notice, I have queered the syllabus, right? So do you see how I used queer as a verb? To queer means to disrupt, to change the status quo, to make it non-normative, right? Normative being like whatever normal is defined as. So when you look at the syllabus, you'll see that it's very different. It's a newsletter, right? It's structured with visuals and images. This is disrupting the status quo of a syllabus. I want the syllabus to be fun and welcoming and friendly. That's the tone I want to set. It's not this legalistic, text-heavy document that you might usually see with a syllabus. So I've queered the syllabus. And it took me like 5 hours to queer it. So it's like it wasn't easy to queer the syllabus. So take a look at that. I hope you appreciate how I've queered the syllabus and changed, right, any sort of normative, right, restrictions or strictures or structures that we think of as, this thing called a syllabus, right? I've changed it. I've queered it up. Going on, I propose we do alternative grading for this class. You have a discussion question this week, so make sure you answer that discussion question. So take a look at alternative grading. What does that mean, right? Most of you are familiar with traditional grading, A, B, C, D, F. You take a quiz, you get a C, you don't have another chance to retake the quiz. You can't redo an assignment, you can't make something up. Alternative grading is like, no. You learn on your own time, right? I'm not going to penalize you for taking extra time to learn a concept, and you'll self-assess your own work. Much like sort of a work evaluation situation where you evaluate your job performance, you'll evaluate your learning in this class, right? And so you'll write 2 letters, really short letters, mid-quarter and a quarter, right? What have you learned in your class, and prove it. Quote from your work, right? Oh, look, I learned these concepts. I didn't know what queer meant. Now I do. And then I'll ask you to grade yourself, A, B, C, right? And if you're learning, for me, that's an A, right? So that's what I mean by alternative grading. It's a different approach to this. Hopefully it's a more relaxed approach. My students over the years have gotten me onto alternative grading. So this is a student-led idea. This is also changing education. I would argue this is queering education, right? There's that verb again, right? To queer something, to disrupt the status quo, to disrupt business as usual. Why are teachers putting grades on things versus asking students to evaluate their own work, which is a huge skill in its own right? You have to be able to evaluate your own work honestly and authentically and transparently in any scenario, job, school, right? That's a skill we all need to learn, right? To look at our own work and be like, okay, this is what I got right. This is what I got wrong. This is what I still have to learn, right? We all need to learn that skill. So essentially, that is alternative grading. You assess your own learning and then tell me what grade you give yourself. My only caveat is, right, you need to do all of the classwork to be able to participate in alternative grading. Like, you can't do nothing and then give yourself an A, right? That's not learning. So I absolutely respect the grade that you give yourself if you do your best, right? You make your best attempt for every assignment, right? Doesn't have to be perfect, but did you learn something? And with this grading system, you're supposed to make mistakes. You're supposed to try new things. That's where you learn. You don't do something safe because you know it'll get an A. You do something different. You do something risky, intellectually risky, knowing that I'll learn something even if it blows up, even if it doesn't work, I learned something. That's alternative grading in a nutshell, is you're encouraged to take intellectual risks and you're not penalized, you're actually celebrated for it. So I think this is, right, again, it's queering grading. Communicate, lots of options here. And again, you'll see we have week 1, you've got your video, your readings, and then you've got your assignments under your readings. Week 2, I usually publish on Sunday night, right? I usually publish the next week on Sunday night. I like to see where people get to in the discussions. But essentially, that's this week, folks. You've got 3 discussions, right? So just participate in all of those. There's a word count for some of them. And email me if you have any questions ever, right? I am always available. So yeah, thank you so much. Bye, folks.